Earlier this month, my colleague Rachelle Akuffo spoke about Africa's climate vulnerabilities with Michael Dorsey. He's the co-founder and managing partner of IberSun Solar. He was attending the COP25 climate talks in Madrid, and she asked him which countries on the continent are most susceptible to problems caused by climate change.
Sub-Saharan Africa is absolutely susceptible almost across the entire sub-Saharan region, all the countries in that region. Just this year, we had a large cyclone impact Mozambique and Zimbabwe, Zambia in an immense way, tremendous cost to lives, totaling about roughly $20 billion in total cost to the economy, just in 1 year alone. So we're seeing really billions, if not trillions of dollars of impacts from the unfolding climate crisis that will play out across the continent. There's really no country that's without exposure, and each year as the climate crisis unfolds and goes unchecked, the implications are worse, both economically, socially, and environmentally.
And let's break some of that down. We did see that the African Development Bank says that the negative effects of climate change are already reducing Africa's GDP by about 1.4%. And then the cost of adapting to climate change are set to reach an annual rate of 3% of GDP by 2030. So walk us through some of the ways that we're seeing that economic impact on the ground in the continent.
So the UN estimates that we need roughly about $50 billion a year to check the unfolding climate crisis just for Africa alone. So far, they've only managed to assemble about $11 million. You know, that's roughly, it's a paltry 1/5000th of what's really needed to check the problem on an annual basis. And those numbers are probably almost science fiction to your listeners out there. But to put it in context, if we had $5,000 or even euro impact on our house, say after a storm, and I gave you 1/1000th of that, I'd be giving you $1 or 1 measly euro. So the response to the crisis is absolutely grossly under where it needs to be, well under where it needs to be. We need much more ambition in the system. We need considerably more resources, because even those estimates of the impacts, that $50 billion a year that's needed, that's actually conservative numbers. And we've only got really several thousandths below what we really need to get outside of this problem.
Certainly it doesn't bode well, obviously, the Trump administration pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. So a lot of these countries are really having to sort of foot the bill on their own. What are we seeing in terms of commitments from individual countries on the continent basically having to take this on?
Countries are trying to get out ahead of this problem. We have, particularly in southern Africa, efforts like scaling solar to respond and building out renewable energy resources, particularly in solar photovoltaics. We've got efforts to address the problem, but those efforts aren't coming to scale. And this is why just yesterday in these negotiations here in Madrid, we had civil society protesting this paltry outcomes that the UN has been assembling with respect to the building of a very small African climate change fund and really inadequate responses to this problem as it unfolds.
And speaking of the Africa Climate Change Fund, we know that initially came about through the African Development Bank. What sort of role do you see this then having in the future?
Well, the minimalist role that the African Climate Change Fund could have is to grow considerably. It needs to grow by at least an order of magnitude, if not 2 to 3 orders of magnitude. Right now, it's absolutely insignificant to tackle the problem. So far, they've only raised about $10 million. And they could easily grow to $100 million, and they need to get really into the billions if they're going to seriously address this problem. One storm alone, Cyclone Ida, last year caused north of $20 billion worth of damages just in 3 countries. So if we've got a fund that's only in the millions, and we've got multi-billion-dollar problems, we know we've got to increase ambition drastically. We've got to get out ahead of this problem and really drive both not just institutional resources on the multilateral side from the development banks and so forth, but we've also got to leverage private sector resources, which are been inadequately leveraged for Africa. And this is a problem that doesn't only just affect Africa, but it has implications worldwide. The reason why we see this huge migration of Africans coming to Europe, trying to escape the unfolding crisis on the continent, has a lot to do with the inadequate responses from the multilateral system. So we've got to increase ambition, we've got to increase the amount of money on the table, and it's only going to be that stepping up of professional responses and serious responses that's going to begin to check this unfolding problem.